On the morning of June 18, 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte woke up late, delirious and in agonizing physical pain. He was in the middle of a desperate campaign known as the 100 Days. He had recently escaped exile on the Isle of Elba and returned to France to reclaim his throne. Facing a massive, united European coalition, his strategic imperative was clear. He had to execute a lightning-fast campaign to defeat the Allied armies one by one before they could combine their forces against him. Initially, the plan worked. Just 2 days prior, he heavily defeated the Prussian army at the Battle of Ligny. To secure total victory, his final obstacle was to march on Brussels and finish off the Duke of Wellington's Anglo-Allied army, which was camped near the small Belgian village of Waterloo. Victory that day was highly likely. In fact, Wellington himself famously called the ensuing battle a near-run thing. If the battle was so winnable, how did a perfect storm of systemic failures dismantle the most successful military commander of the 19th century in a single afternoon? The collapse began with a severe environmental crisis. Heavy overnight rains had turned the dirt roads and fields of Belgium into deep, thick mud. Because of the weather, Napoleon made his first critical decision of the day. He delayed his main attack by roughly 4 hours to allow the ground to dry. His logic was mathematically sound. French artillery and cavalry were his greatest advantages, but they were practically useless if heavy cannonballs sank into the muck instead of skipping through enemy lines, and if horses were bogged down in the field. While the weather stalled his army externally, Napoleon was dealing with an internal biological crisis. He was suffering from a severe urinary tract infection and a highly painful flare-up of thrombosed hemorrhoids. To manage the pain, his doctors administered heavy doses of laudanum, an opiate. The drugs left the emperor lethargic, prone to falling asleep at his desk, and incredibly slow to issue clear orders. The sheer physical agony made it nearly impossible for him to sit on his horse and survey the battlefield. This completely stripped him of the intense, micromanagement command style he was famous for. The 4-hour environmental delay, combined with his opiate-induced detachment, fatally forced Napoleon to hand over control of the battle to his flawed subordinates, right as the clock was ticking down. This delegation led to a rapid breakdown in staff work. Marshal Soult, who severely lacked administrative skills, drafted confusing orders that historians have since described as impenetrable nonsense. Marshal Grouchy misinterpreted those orders entirely. Instead of pivoting his corps toward the sound of the cannons at Waterloo, he rigidly marched his men away to track the retreating Prussians. The mathematical consequence of that rigid decision was devastating. Over 30,000 French troops were entirely removed from the decisive battle when Napoleon needed them most. Back on the main battlefield, tactical decisions fell to Marshal Ney, a commander affectionately known as the bravest of the brave. Ney severely misread the state of the battle. He impulsively launched a massive cavalry charge without any infantry or artillery support, sending his horsemen crashing into unbreakable British infantry squares. Replacing Napoleon's visionary oversight with Soult's bad riding, Grouchy's lack of initiative, and Ney's rashness crippled the French army's ability to adapt on the fly. Poor tactical decisions on the ground turned specific geographical strongpoints into massive drains on French resources. In the center of the Allied line, the French failed to quickly capture the vital farm of La Haye-Sainte, which entirely delayed their ability to break Wellington's center. Over on the right flank, the French attacked the chateau of Hougoumont. Intended as a simple diversion, it rapidly escalated out of control. The walled fortress became an accidental sinkhole, pinning down 15,000 French troops against a fraction of their number. Obsessing over these fortified farms drained the French army of the time, energy, and manpower they desperately needed to mount a centralized breakthrough. Because of the 4-hour morning mud delay and the grinding tactical stalemates at the farmhouses, the French simply ran out of time. In the late afternoon, the climax arrived. Blücher's Prussian army finally reached the battlefield, hitting the French right flank at Plancenoit. Caught in a tightening pincer, Napoleon sent in his elite Imperial Guard, but they were ultimately repulsed, and their formation broke. The French army collapsed into a total rout, suffering up to 32,000 casualties. The defeat marked the end of the 100 Days, culminating in Napoleon's capture and his permanent exile to the remote island of St. Helena. Waterloo proves that military supremacy is a fragile ecosystem. When environmental friction, biological vulnerability, and command incompetence strike simultaneously, even the greatest empire in history can fall in a single afternoon.